But let's start things off today with some NFL contender and pretender. We've got, I believe, 8 teams that we're going to touch on, and I believe 4 from each conference. No, sorry, we've got 3 AFC and 5 NFC. So 8 teams, but slightly off balance conference wise. But let's start things off with the current leader of the NFC North, sitting at 8-3, the Chicago Bears. Braden, are they contenders or pretenders?
I think that the Bears are pretenders this year. They're eighth in points per game, but they are 27th in points per game allowed. They've had a lot of games that are just absolute shootouts. Obviously, the main one that comes to mind is the game against the Cincinnati Bengals a couple of weeks back. They seem to be winning every game by a very, very slim margin as well. And I checked their point differential. I expected it to be, a low number. Despite being 8-3, the Bears have a point differential of -3 this year, which is just mind-boggling. They're 30th in opponent yards per carry allowed, 27th in opponent yards per passing attempt. Those stats are not good when you're already 27th in points per game allowed. They do lead the NFL in interceptions with 16, but J.J. McCarthy, Geno Smith, Spencer Rattler, and Joe Flacco have combined for 12 of those across 5 games. With an upcoming schedule that features the Eagles, the Packers twice, the 49ers, and the Lions to end the year, I do expect the Bears to fall back to earth quite a bit. I'm not going to say they're a bad team. This is similar to BYU Texas Tech for me when we had that a couple of weeks ago, and all the BYU fans were getting on me in our TikTok mentions. I think the Bears are a fine team, but I think this team is more of like a 9-10 win team than a 12-5 team or a 13-4 team, and I expect them to finish third in the NFC North. So I'm going to say they're a pretender.
Yeah, I think the Bears are pretenders as well. You mentioned the -3 point differential, despite being 8-3. Albeit a lot of that is from the week 2 loss in Detroit, where I think they lost by 31. I think they can score on good defenses. And this week coming up will be a good test against the Eagles, a very good defense. But if they can't force turnovers at the rate that they have been, this team is going to get stomped. They've given up 292 points so far this year, which is 8th most in the NFL. And again, like I just said, a lot of that has to do with getting 52 hung on you in week 2. But they still have 3 divisional games left, 2 against the Packers, 1 against Detroit. They still have the Eagles and the 49ers as well coming up. So there's a real chance that, as good as the start has been for the Bears, there's a chance this team finishes at 8-9 or 9-8 and misses the playoffs altogether. So I need to see them beat a truly good team before I say they're contenders. And I like the Bears. I'm a huge Ben Johnson fan. I like Caleb Williams a lot, but I can't do it yet. So I'm with you. I'm going to say that they're a pretender. As for another NFC North team, the Packers, who sit at 7-3-1. Braden, are they a contender or a pretender?
I'm going to say that Green Bay is a contender. They have had some weird games, like the Giants game 2 weeks ago. They let them hang around there too long. I'm blanking on who they lost to the week before, but that was another weird one where they clearly were the much better team on paper and just didn't come out to play. But on the year, the Packers are 13th in points per game, 5th in points per game allowed. They're second in opponent yards per play. They have the best third down conversion rate offensively and the 10th best opponent conversion rate allowed on the third downs on the defensive side of the ball. And then they're first against the pass in terms of yards per play, 7th allowing yards per carry on the ground. The Packers dominate statistically. They have been inconsistent, but with a defense like that, they really can hang with any team unless like really, really bad Jordan Love shows up. And we see that about 10 to 20% of the time. About 70% of the time, he's like very solid to, above average. And then you have another 10 to 20% where he's elite. Just a very weird quarterback in terms of that, where you just can't get a consistent great season out of him, where he's, putting up 250 yards, or I guess 200 to 250 yards and 2 touchdowns every game. But the Packers really just need to step up forcing turnovers. That's their like one Achilles heel on the defensive side of the ball, if you can even call it that. They force about 1 turnover per game. They turned over the second least in the NFL, though. I think overall this Packers team is very balanced. A lot of how far they can go in the playoffs hinges on Jordan Love, but this team on paper is absolutely a contender.
And yeah, I'm with you again. I think they're a contender as well. I will say though, you mentioned the struggles as of late. As of right now, the Green Bay Packers team that we've been seeing for the past few weeks, I'm saying they're a pretender. but I don't think this is the Packers team that we're going to see come, December and January. I expect them to figure some things out. They did look incredible through the first couple of games, but since then they've looked like a very different team. Two of those three losses are to Carolina and Cleveland. They barely beat the Cardinals. The Giants game was back and forth for the majority of that game. I don't think they've played their best football though, and if the offense can get things clicking, I think this is going to be a very, very scary team to play. It's going to have to revolve around Josh Jacobs and the run game, I think, because there's really not a wide receiver who can truly beat you on that team. They've got a lot of wide receiver twos and threes. I don't know that they've really got a true wide receiver one, but the defense is lights out. They can keep them in any game. And like I think all of their losses, they've given up less than 15 points or less than 20 points for sure. So I would not want to face that defense come playoff time. But if they can handle their business the rest of the year and their offense starts to figure things out, I think they will be a true contender come playoff time. Up next, the 6-5 Tampa Bay Buccaneers just got smoked on Sunday Night Football. Braden, are they a contender or pretender?
Yeah, this one feels fairly easy right now. I think Tampa Bay is pretty clearly a pretender. And granted, I did want to give them some grace because of how banged up they've been, especially in the offensive side of the ball. Chris Godwin's played, I think, only 3 games all year. Mike Evans and Bucky Irving have each been out for the last 2-ish months. I think Bucky's supposed to be back this week, which is nice for them. But just as that happens, Baker gets banged up. So I want to give him the benefit of the doubt in some aspect. But at the same time, this Buccaneers team is not good enough, even if those guys are all fully healthy, I don't think. They're 14th on the year in points per game, but 25th in points per game allowed. So that's what gives me pause. Even if you have all these guys on the offense side of the ball fully healthy, is your defense, playoff caliber or, let alone championship caliber? This year they have a negative 25 point differential. They've only won 2 games by more than 3 points, and those were against the Mac Jones led 49ers and the Saints, who switched quarterbacks at halftime. They aren't in the top half of either rushing or passing offense. They do force quite a number of turnovers. They're 7th in the NFL in turnovers per game forced. So there is a little bit going for them there. They're kind of the anti-Green Bay Packers in a sense. But overall, I think the Buccaneers just have too many injuries and too porous of a defense to be a true contender right now.
And I'm with you again, 3 out of 3. For a team that looked unstoppable at the start of the season, they have looked horrendous the past month or so. Now you add in Baker's shoulder injury, as I mentioned. It sounds like an AC sprain, and not that that's long term, but for the Bucs as a whole, this is a situation where if they don't win the NFC South, which they probably will for what it's worth, but if they don't win the NFC South, they might not make the playoffs as a whole. The defense cannot stop anybody. I mentioned the Bears minus 3 point differential. The Bucs have a negative 25 point differential, so even worse. This just does not look like the same team that we saw that first month of the season, where they had a real chance to be the number 1 seed in the NFC, and Baker Mayfield was a legitimate MVP candidate. So for the time being, at least, they look like pretty serious pretenders with my 2 eyes. Up next, the 8-4 San Francisco 49ers. Braden, who do you have for them?
I think the 49ers are a contender. We didn't see that last night in the first half, especially. Brock Purdy throwing 3 interceptions, looked extremely poor in his first game back, and all 3 of those picks were pretty bad throws, especially the last 2. The rest of the team looked great, however. Christian McCaffrey is able to carry this offense by himself. The passing game weapons were pretty solid as well. George Kittle had a nice night. So I think there's enough there for the 49ers where they can, survive until Brock Purdy's able to get fully healthy and fully knock off the rust. On the year, they're 15th in points per game and 11th in points per game allowed. Those don't scream like championship numbers, but I think they're probably better than the numbers would say, at least at full strength. They turn the ball over way too often. That's their, my biggest gripe with them. They're at 1.5 turnovers per game, which is towards the top of the NFL in terms of most turnovers. They only give 1 takeaway per game, but they are pretty disciplined. They're second in the NFL in fewest penalties and penalty yards. That's big come playoff time, where every yard matters. The 49ers this year are 3-1 with Brock Purdy. They're putting up 24.8 points and 348.5 yards per game. I think once he gets back to full speed, this Niners team is just as good as the Super Bowl caliber team they had a couple of years back.
Well, I'm glad we're not agreeing on all of these. I do have the 49ers as a pretender. The main reason being this defense has really struggled without Nick Bosa and Fred Warner. Granted, they looked great last night against the Panthers, but at the same time, it's the Panthers. They're not too prolific of an offense. They gave up 488 yards to Arizona and over 400 yards to the Rams, who at some point just stopped trying. In that game, they put up 42 points. So they were just doing whatever they wanted to San Fran. Offensively, though, I do think they have the firepower to put up points on anybody. That is assuming Brock Purdy does not throw 3 picks like he did last night. They probably won't win the NFC West with the Rams and the Seahawks going nuclear this year, meaning if they finish third in the division, they will be at best the 6th seed in the NFC playoffs, meaning they would play one of the divisional winners from the NFC North, the East, which would be the Eagles, or the West. So I'm probably not picking them in any of those games on the road. So for that reason, I'm going to say they're a pretender. But if this team is able to go on a run, if they finish the season, let's say 12-5, the Rams finish the season on a bit of a cold stretch. They finish 11-6, which I don't see happening. But if they win the division somehow, this team is certainly a contender. But I don't see that happening. So I'm going to say pretender. Another NFC West team, Braden, the Seattle Seahawks sitting at 8-3. Are they contenders or pretenders?
I'm going to say that Seattle is a pretender here. Maybe it's counterintuitive to say that the 49ers are a contender and the Seahawks aren't, but maybe this is more of just a vibes thing for me. Seattle is currently the 5 seed in the NFC. They're third in points per game. They are seventh in points per game allowed. But it feels like they've also kind of benefited from a little bit of an easy schedule. I don't have it in front of me right now, but a lot of their wins have come against, I think, subpar teams. They're running the ball a lot, and they're not super efficient at it. They run the ball at the highest rate in the league. They're 26th in yards per carry. And they also pass the ball really well, and they just don't for a lot of it. I think part of that has to do with being up against bad teams, and you're not really in a passing game script. So maybe that's something that will get fixed once they're playing good teams. But we saw Sam Darnold face the LA Rams and completely melt down, and he did that twice at the end of last year against the Lions in Week 18 and then against the Rams in the wild card round. He looks very similar to who he was last year, which is great for the majority of the season. But against against good teams, I don't know if I really trust Sam Darnold enough to label Seattle as a contender, even though they have guys like JSN who are record-breaking players.
And yeah, I'm going to say a contender, but I'm with you. I think a lot of that hinges on the play of Sam Darnold. He threw 4 interceptions against the Rams, and despite that, LA only won by 2 points at home. So I do think that this defense, kind of the same thing with Green Bay, regardless of what offense shows up, their defense is good enough to keep them in any game. But I do agree they have beaten up on some pretty bad teams. They've beaten the Texans, they've beaten the Jags. They lost a very close one to the Bucks, where the defense, ironically enough, let them down. And Sam Darnold played great. But I think from what I've seen from this team, I do think that they are a legitimate contender. But if we see, Week 18 and wild card versions of Sam Darnold from last year come December and January, then yeah, this team is undoubtedly a pretender. But for the time being, I haven't seen that. I'm going to give them the benefit of the doubt. I will say Seattle is a contender. And then moving on over to the AFC, the 8-3 Indianapolis Colts, Braden, are they contenders or pretenders?
I'm going to say Indianapolis is a contender. They're first in the NFL in points per game. They allow the ninth fewest points per game in the NFL as well. Their offense is ridiculously efficient too. First in yards per carry, which obviously, when you have Jonathan Taylor, is a lot easier to do. He is, in my opinion, the MVP right now. He will be the Offensive Player of the Year for sure. Probably not going to win MVP over Drake May or Matthew Stafford, but a great season from him nonetheless. Their passing offense is also pretty efficient as well. Fourth in yards per attempt there. Their defense is also top 12 against both the pass and the rush on a per play basis. On paper, this team is clearly a contender. They remind me a ton of the 2024 Vikings, however. Their postseason hopes are going to exclusively come down to the play of Daniel Jones. So far, Jones has played 5 games against teams that I would describe as playoff hopefuls. 3 of them are playoff locks, with Denver. I guess maybe two of them are locks. Probably three are playoff teams at least, with Denver and both LA teams. And then I also threw in Pittsburgh and Kansas City in there. Against Denver, 316 yards, one touchdown, no picks. Against the Rams, 262 yards, one touchdown, two picks. The Chargers, 288 yards, two touchdowns, no picks. The Steelers, 342 yards, one touchdown, three interceptions. That was a bad game from him. And then against the Chiefs this past Sunday, 181 yards passing, two touchdowns, no picks in an OT loss. I think I'm going to call him a contender. I think Daniel Jones is, going to be playing serviceable enough where the Colts are going to be able to, survive some mediocre games from him. He just has to avoid a complete meltdown like we saw with Sam Darnold last year. And assuming he can avoid that, the Colts have a great chance to go to at least the divisional round of the playoffs. If not, maybe sneak into the Super Bowl potentially.
Yeah, I'm with you 100%. I think this Colts team is legit. I've got them as contenders as well. They've had some tough losses in recent weeks, especially this one on Sunday against the Chiefs where they went to overtime. But when you have a top three offensive player in the league, you've got a shot in Jonathan Taylor. Daniel Jones struggled against Pittsburgh. He threw three picks in that game. But outside of that, he's been phenomenal. The defense has been really solid as well. They just held Kansas City to 20 points in regulation and led for most of that game, actually. And that game was in Kansas City as well. They have the second best point differential in the league behind only the LA Rams. I think this Colts team could do some very serious damage, and I'm with you. I think their floor is probably the second round of the playoffs, and their ceiling. I mean, if they're playing as well as they have all year, this is a team that's got legitimate Super Bowl aspirations. So I'm with you. I've got them as a contender as well. Another AFC South team, the 7-4 Jacksonville Jaguars. Braden, what do you got for them?
I'm going to say the Jags are a pretender here. They're 12th in points per game and 16th in points per game allowed. Those aren't bad numbers on their own, but it's nothing special. They're 22nd in third down conversion rate and 17th in red zone touchdown percentage on the offensive side of the ball. They're 25th in yards per pass attempt. A lot of that hinges on Trevor Lawrence, getting the good version of him as opposed to getting the mediocre or the bad version of him, which come out all too often. Their defense is one of the best against the run this year. They allow the fewest rushing yards per game. They're fifth in yards per carry against. They're serviceable enough against the pass, eighth in opponent yards per attempt, third highest interception rate in the league, but they don't get to the quarterback enough. They're 28th in sack rate. Similarly to the Colts, the Jags are going to go as far as Trevor Lawrence can lead them, but I don't think, unlike the Colts, they're not built to survive a playoff game in which Lawrence struggles. Their rushing attack is mediocre. Travis Etienne had some great games to start the year. He's fallen back to earth. Bashal Tutin has started to get more reps. I'm not sure, how much of his recent play is going to be sustainable. I liked him as a prospect, but at the same time, he's getting 5 carries a game for the most part, and is more of a change of pace guy. I'm curious to see if they'll give him like 10 to 12 touches in any of these games down the stretch, and maybe that gives their rushing attack a little bit more juice. But we'll have to see. The Jags also have the second most penalty yards per game, and you throw in that they don't have Travis Hunter for the rest of the year. You throw in that Brian Thomas Jr. has been banged up, and when he has been healthy, he hasn't been all that great. I don't see the Jags really being enough on the offensive side of the ball to, put up more than 20 points per game. And, you probably aren't going to win 3 playoff games in a row, maybe 4 playoff games in a row, if your offense can't score the ball at a high rate.
Yeah, I think the Jags are fraudulent as fuck. Pardon my French. I think this is the most overrated team in the league. Trevor Lawrence will not win them a playoff game. I'm just going to say that right now. Travis Hunter, you mentioned, out for the year. Brian Thomas Jr. can't catch a cold. The defense has looked good at times, but then at other times they blow a 19-point lead in the fourth against Davis Mills. How this team is 7-4, frankly, boggles my mind. They had no business winning this past weekend against Arizona, and they were my best bet of the week. Jacksonville was, so I got it right. But Trevor Lawrence threw 3 picks, and one of that was for a pick 6. They are fraudulent, and this run is going to continue because 3 of their next 6 games come against the Titans and the Jets. So they'll be a playoff team, but mark my words right now, on November 25th, they will get absolutely rinsed in the wild card round by whoever they play. And we can come back to that. But I feel very, very strongly that the Jaguars are not going to do any damage come postseason time. And then the last team that we're going to decide is a contender or pretender today, the Kansas City Chiefs, who it's crazy that we're even mentioning them in this conversation, but they're 6-5, not the season that we're used to seeing out of them. Braden, are they contenders or pretenders?
Yeah, despite not currently being in the playoff picture, the Chiefs are currently the 10 seed. I think they're still a contender. They are top 10 in both points scored and allowed per game. They're in the top 5 in points per game allowed. They have the sixth best point differential in the NFL at a positive 76. They are kind of really struggling to beat some of these good teams, which obviously you need to do. But beating the Colts is a great step in the right direction there. Also beat Detroit earlier in the year. They got a win over Baltimore, which I believe Lamar Jackson was still starting in that game. Correct me if I'm wrong. Um, so overall, they've just had a really tough schedule for the most part. The teams they've played and have like absolutely should have beaten, being the Giants, the Raiders, the Commanders, they've won those games. I don't fault them for losing, to the Chargers, to the Eagles, a little bit to Jacksonville. That was one that was kind of iffy, but it was on the road. Losing at Buffalo and losing at Denver, those are excusable losses. And granted, you don't want to lose games, but I don't think it's a reflection of how talented the Chiefs actually are. If you give the Chiefs the Jaguars schedule, and they're probably a 9-2 team, so I don't think it's really too much of an issue there. Patrick Mahomes looks like he's finally back. Had a couple of relative down years by his standards. Rashee Rice is having a great impact now that he's back at full speed. If the Chiefs get into the playoffs, they might make it out of the AFC and make it to their fourth straight Super Bowl. They are that talented on paper, and they've shown it on the field.
Yeah, I've got not a whole lot to add. This is a team that started 1-4. They've now won 5 of the last 6. 4 of their 5 losses have come against very good teams, being the Bills, the Eagles, the Broncos, and the Chargers. The only game that they lost to a bad team was the Jaguars, who are the biggest frauds in the sport. Just had to reiterate that. But the defense has looked much more like the Kansas City defense that we're used to seeing since their bye week. So if you have Mahomes, you have Andy Reid, you have a good defense, you're a contender no matter what. So despite the slow start for Kansas City standards, this team is still very much a contender.